Hello, everyone watching and listening, and welcome back to the Free Radical podcast. This is your host, Swami Padmanabha, here today with a very special guest, senior Vaishnava scholar and transformative coach, Dhira Govinda Prabhu. Dhira Govindaji, thank you so much for joining us.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Padmanabha Swami, for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Before we start our conversation, I'll read a few words from Dhira Govinda Prabhu's biography. It says like this: David B. Wolf, PhD, also known as Dhira Govinda dasa, has practiced and taught Bhakti Yoga since the early 80s. In the late 80s, early 90s, he led the book distributions and Kirtan party in Arab villages in the Middle East, and is the author of Krishna, Israel, and the Druze, an interreligious odyssey. Also in the mid-80s, he served as ISKCON temple president in Tel Aviv, and for several years in the 90s and 2000s, he served as chairperson of the board of directors of ISKCON of Alachua, New Raman Reddy, the largest community of Bhakti yogis in North America. In 1998, he established the ISKCON Central Office of Child Protection and served as director for more than 6 years. He's the founder of the Satvatove Institute School of Transformative Coaching and has conducted hundreds of Vaishnava-based transformational seminars around the world. In the 1990s, Dhira Govinda developed the Bedi Personality Inventory, and his doctoral dissertation is entitled Effects of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra on Stress, Depression, and the Three Gunas. He's a world leader in mantra meditation research and has published extensively in social science research journals. Since the early 2000s, he has supervised psychotherapy interns for the state of Florida. Dhira Govinda has been featured as a communications expert on media outlets such as Fox News and CNN News, and is the author of Relationships That Work, The Power of Conscious Living. Additionally, he is the author of The Power of Bhakti, Ancient Spiritual Science for the Modern Distracted Mind. And his favorite activity is reading Srila Prabhupada's books. So I will share, before I forget, the contact of Dhira Govinda Prabhu that I will share at the end for those who may like to contact with him. Here is his email, David B. Wolf at Satvatove. It's SATVATOBE.com. So, in connection to my personal experience with Dhira Govinda Prabhu, I think I first heard you, I think so, in connection to the Satvatove Foundation, probably from Brinda Sundari, who also works in your team. And then we met first time in Alacha with Bhakti Rasa, and that was a nice meeting, a very funny meeting in the sense that you realized that she has been serving prasad to you at school when you were a student before you officially joined Krishna consciousness, right?
Back in the early 80s, before I was even Bhakti Dev, yes.
Interesting. Yeah, it was very epiphany-like moment when the two of you realized, oh, it was you, the one who received prasad, or it was you, the one who was serving. So that was very sweet. So yeah, after that initial meeting that was very, very inspiring, I was invited by Brinda Sundari to one of the introductory Satvatove seminars led by Dhira Govinda Prabhu in Denver last year. It was very nice, very inspiring, and that allowed me to know you, of course, a little bit more. And then we have some further private correspondence, and here we are doing a podcast, and we also have had a program together that we did at Alachua, at your place, speaking also on unconditional love and so on. So anyhow, here we are today. Thank you so much again for joining. And I don't know, I generally start sometimes my conversations, Dhira Govinda Prabhu, asking some of my guests, what's the contribution to the world in general and the Gaudiya Vaishnava society in particular that you think we can offer the two of us together today, trying to create some alchemy between the two? What made you being here today in terms of this, of the potential contribution we may offer to our conversation?
Hare Krishna. Well, from your first visit to my home, going back, I guess, almost a year with Bhakti Ras Prabhu, and then through our association in Denver and the Satvatove Foundational Seminar and our correspondence, and I've appreciated what I experience as our resonance and our like-mindedness in our attempts and endeavors to practice and share bhakti and share bhakti, our let's say aspirations towards a truly personal approach and foundation for that radically personal spiritual process of bhakti. And so my hope, and I'm trusting that we'll synergize here to create meaningful consciousness raising for ourselves and for the viewers. That's kind of my intention and vision here.
Thank you so much for helping me understand further why I'm making this podcast and why I'm inviting all of you, because I may have my own reasons, or I may think I know why I'm doing all this, but every time I'm asking people like you and my guests why they chose to be here, they are always further expanding my horizons and helping me to discover further layers of purpose. And yeah, I deeply resonate with your words and feel honored that somehow you identified me as someone who may make some contribution along with you and others in terms of healing, in terms of inviting the members of the Gaudiya community to practice from a healthy, sustainable place. And yeah, I really appreciate your Satvatove project. And I like today, even regarding some things I may like to talk about, probably some of them, if not most of them, may be based on things I've experienced in the Satvatove seminar that I took. Only the first one. I was invited to the second one. I didn't have time yet, but looking forward to that. So I don't know. And also I feel that so many of the points you were mentioning in your Satvatove seminar resonated with my book on radical personalism, that I remember at the time I did the seminar. I just published my book, so you didn't have it. I didn't have a chance to give you a copy and you for reading it, I think so. But it was very interesting that you were mentioning different things, or even quoting authors that I will quote in my book, and even in some cases the exact same quote that I put in my book. You were invoking that in the seminar without knowing about it. So that was, for me, enough epiphany. But overall, I would like to begin by saying and appreciating your effort, and also that's part of my intention, the importance of presenting a version of Bhakti and Krishna consciousness where all the dimensions of our being are integrated, right? Like physical, emotional, psychic, mental, spiritual, achieving more wholeness, a wholeness that includes holiness, but it's not mere holiness without wholeness, but combination of holiness and wholeness, what I may like to call holiness, so to say, like integrating our humanity with our spirituality, so to say, since one is not, I think so, one is not opposed to the other, especially in our tradition that we worship Krishna in Vrindavan in his human-like form, which means fully human, fully divine. So if we want to worship someone who is fully human and fully divine, we have to have our full humanity in place along with our spirituality. So I don't know which are your thoughts in this connection, because also I don't know how much not criticism, but sometimes maybe opposition or arguments you may have found in some circles about working on this emotional, psychological stuff is Maya, is relative, has nothing to do with my spiritual pursuit. This type of conceptions of transcendence as mere otherworldly stuff and nothing dealing with our daily experience. So I don't know if you have any thoughts to share in that connection. I mean, you have a lot, I'm sure. If you could share some of those today.
Well, I appreciate what you just expressed. And, so there's a lot of talk, like in the devotional communities, whether identifying as Vaishnava or Christian or Judaic, or, there's devotional communities from so many traditions. A lot of talk of pure devotion to Krishna, pure devotion to God. And that's the goal. And now, related to what you said, the wholeness, I like that whole and holy and holiness. So for sure, if we don't have all parts of ourself, all aspects, all God-given qualities of ourself available, if to whatever extent we're not ready or at choice to connect with all parts of ourself, there's no question of pure devotion to Krishna, because we're withholding, we're withholding from God. Now, for sure, if we do have connection with different aspects of our personal power, our emotional self, our tenderness, our clarity, our spontaneity, our childlike spirit of discovery. If we have connection of that, it doesn't guarantee that we'll use it in devotion, to use the analogy, to water the root of the tree. We might misuse it, we might abuse it, for sure. At the same time, if we're not connected to all aspects of our God-given power and qualities, it's for sure we're not engaged in pure devotion. And so this is a point that comes to mind and heart in hearing what you just expressed. I'm also reminded of right there at the start of Bhagavad Gita. I'm reminded of, this was I had a conversation about 15 years ago, maybe a little more, with Michael Gressett. He's a professor, and he's also known as Swami Das.
Okay.
Actually, he's a graduate of the Satvatove Foundational and Advanced Seminars from about 15 years ago. And actually, he's a professor of religion or Sanskrit, and his dissertation, he writes a lot about his Satvatove experience and how it relates to devotional communities. And anyhow, he was speaking with me, and this is more or less in his dissertation, that he had a friend and neighbor named Nimai. Nimai was a carpenter. And so they're living like in a devotional community, aspiring to follow Bhagavad Gita. Nimai said to Professor Gressett, the people in this community, they don't understand the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita. So Gressett was like, because typically, as we're aware, the first principles, the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita is typically regarded as, those 20 verses in chapter 2 where Krishna explains the distinction between spirit and matter and the soul and the body, and natvevaham jatuna samna. Okay, you're lamenting for that what's not worthy of grief. So Gressett was saying, the people here, the residents of the community don't understand. They don't get the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita. So you mean like the difference between soul and body? And Nimai said, no. He said, the first lesson of Bhagavad Gita is to feel your feelings and express them. So Nimai there, he's referring to chapter 1 and the early parts of chapter 2, of course, where there's Arjuna, before the distinction between spirit and matter and what is karma and the whole profound philosophical thesis. There's Arjuna. And so that struck me, because if we think about Arjuna's situation, Arjuna, of course, he's the alpha warrior of the time, and he's experiencing sensation, feeling, and thought, all of which are decidedly not warrior-like. So I'm just kind of like trying to imagine the courage required for Arjuna to not only allow himself to be aware of what the weakness and the tears, and he's trembling, he can't even hold his bow, like a very non-warrior like feeling, thoughts, sensations. So it requires a lot of courage, not just to experience them, but at the same time to communicate himself to his trusted friend, who of course soon became his guru, Krishna. And so Nimai, the carpenter, said that because Arjuna's willingness to experience his experience, feel his feelings, and express them. That, of course, is the seed that unfolds as the profound philosophical thesis of Bhagavad Gita. So before before that we're not this body part, there's so much learning, transformation, and realization available about what it means at the foundational level to cultivate true devotional consciousness.
Great point. Thanks for sharing, and thanks to Nimai. Wherever he is, whomever he is, I'm sure many of us are grateful, indebted to him from the distance. Nimai Kijai. Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking, basically what you mentioned, like many devotees may rush into this famous section of the Gita. Just let's begin with "We are not this body," but as Nimai properly pointed to, first we have to acknowledge whatever body we are not ultimately, so to say, and know what to do with our emotional body and physical body and mental body, and especially when that body or those bodies are going through embarrassing situations, if you will, as the ones that Arjuna is going through in the first chapter. It's not like, as you say, a glorious moment for the topmost warrior on the world to be crying like a baby, so to say, and saying, I want to leave this battlefield and I prefer that they kill me and all this type of stuff. But he has, and I appreciate your words, that he has the courage to acknowledge his weakness, if you will, although it may sound paradoxical, but it requires courage to basically to be vulnerable, as I like to put in my book on radical personalism. Strictly speaking, you cannot be courageous if you are not being vulnerable, because to be courage means that you are facing some form of risk or emotional exposure or uncertainty, and you need to. Those are synonymous with vulnerability, basically. So I really appreciate, because the first chapter of the Gita is called Vishada Yoga, which basically means the yoga of the dejection or distress. So basically, for me, following what you are saying, is like, okay, before jumping into we are spirit souls, let's have the courage to embrace our pain, our suffering, our dejection, not to be evasive, but confront them in a healthy way, in an equipped way, in a comprehensive way. Let's sit, as I put in my book, let's sit with our pain and not sit on top of our pain. and let's integrate our human dimensions, even painful, even embarrassing, even all these messy layers of our humanity. Let's first of all have them acknowledged, have them accepted, have them embraced, have them dealt with, and then we can sit and talk about how we are spirit souls and which is our potential in bhakti and a loving relationship with God eternally, which are all beautiful ideas, but sometimes we can invoke these beautiful ideas as some sort of poetic evasiveness, so to say, like bring some great big ideas just to not do away with the smaller ideas that still we need to work through, so to say.
I appreciate your realizations, your sharing there. Yes.
As you emphasize the word sattva, which is in the very name of your foundation, Satvatove, no? So I think I totally agree with you, this idea of sattva being, and Prabhupada himself made this point many times, sattva is a very ideal foundation. So we can, it's like, I give the example, like if you want to take a plane to arrive to a certain destination, first you have to arrive to the airport. You cannot expect the plane to knock your door and come to your house and take you directly to Golok, so to say. So sattva is kind of arriving at the airport, so to say, at the proper platform from which you can pick your plane from a balanced bedrock, so to say, from a realistic, humanly integrated, wholesome foundation. So your journey to the beyond, so to say, is realistic and it's not actually evasive.
Yeah, the airport is not the goal. At the same time, it's important to get to the airport. It's important to get to the airport. The name of our institute, Satvatove. Tov in the biblical Hebrew means about the same thing as sattva. The essence of sattva is to bring to conscious perception that which till now has not been perceived. And again, so like, and maybe from one dimension of analysis, what was happening for Arjuna, it wasn't sattvic, it was sentimental, it was lower modes. I mean, for one, of course, Arjuna's pure devotee. But then, because otherwise, in the name of spirituality, high-level philosophy, we're basing it literally on ignorance. Like, I'm going to ignore what's there.
Mm-hmm.
Ignorance is really not a particularly powerful, conducive foundation for spiritual advancement, spiritual realization. Ignorance, like let's say if I'm full of bitterness because I feel someone wronged me and I feel hurt, so I have bitterness, hostility, resentment. At the same time, I'm not sattvic enough to acknowledge what's actually happening for me, like Arjuna acknowledge, here's what's happening for me, as non-warrior like as it is. Perhaps I'm so attached to my image of being spiritual. And of course, we know a spiritual person isn't bitter. A spiritual person is forgiving and compassionate. So maybe to myself and to others, I'll put on the forgiving, compassionate, peaceful face. At the same time, I got all this bitterness and resentment eating me up inside, and I'm never, ever going to deal with it because I'm not even acknowledging it's there. And because in the name of, it's tamas, to ignore, that's to ignore what's there. In the name of sattva and shuddha sattva, I'm actually ignoring my actual experience, and to experience my actual experience as much as it might not seem right or doesn't look good, that's sattvic, and that's the doorway to genuine transcendence, as we see in how Bhagavad Gita unfolds.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, I'm recalling a few quotes you shared that day on the seminar, something like, okay, you may be experiencing rajasic or tamasic emotions, let's say, but to acknowledge them, however tamasic they may be, that's sattvic. No, so the very acknowledgement of even the worst of the worst it puts you in the platform of sattva, basically. And as you nicely pointed, to ignore that is basically synonymous with ignorance, basically, which is tamagun. So can you listen to me? Okay, there, you froze for a second. It's okay.
Yeah,
can you listen to me now? Yeah,
I'm hearing you fine. So sometimes sometimes your picture gets frozen, and apparently for you, sometimes my picture's getting frozen. I'm hearing you fine. Sometimes the picture gets frozen for a moment or two.
No problem. Give me 1 second that I will take one pen that I have here that I like to take a few notes that you are mentioning many interesting stuff. I want to bring it up again. 1 second. Thank you. So yeah, I appreciate that point that sattva is the recognition and the acceptance and the acknowledgement of whatever is happening, as embarrassing or as tamasic or as rajasic as it may be. The very fact of shedding proper light to whatever is going on in the present moment in itself brings sattva, and in itself upgrades and redeems our experience. And also, I would think it's something you mentioned before for a minute, because again, the importance of you used this term a few times, I remember in our seminar, our God-given capacities or our God-given attributes, which I think is very healing to bring that in mind, because sometimes we may see we have the tendency to see ourselves like isolated from the divine. So we see ourselves and our attributes or limitations or whatever as completely disconnected from any gift we may have received from God. So when we bring into the picture your emotions or your mind or your potential, your intellect, your body, in one sense, all is a God-given capacity, God-given tool in potential for bhakti. That brings a lot of more wholeness into the picture in terms of your definition of pure devotion, which Rupa Goswami also says Krishna Anushilanam, which basically speaks of offering all our faculties, so to say, for the pleasure of God. So if we are really concerned with pure devotion, we should be concerned with not ignoring any faculty, not neglecting any of the human dimensions, but properly honoring and offering them in service. So yeah, I appreciated that framing of the idea of pure devotion, because sometimes also we can just limit that to some very narrow-minded idea of giving pleasure to Krishna in a purely transcendental way without taking the trouble to integrate our human dimensions, and also without taking the trouble of like extending that expression of love to everyone else. No, because I think also that if we speak in terms of pure devotion, it's not just God and me and everyone else neglected, but actually, as you say, God being the root of the tree. If you are watering that root, naturally the rest of the tree will reflect that watering. So the way we relate to everyone else must be a symptom of how much we are loving God also. So I don't know, what do you think of that?
Well, well, on the path, we're aspiring to truly be personalists, and that means like we're endeavoring to serve not just Srimati Radharani, not just Sri Krishna, but the relationship, the relationship. And so, for sure, it completely makes sense that our relationships in this realm, whether with those who identify as bhakti yogis or those who don't identify that way, that our relationships are representing at least that aspiration towards purity and that personalism. Otherwise, it is kind of like we might talk a good game about personalism and the Brahmic Jyoti and divine couple. We might talk a good game. At the same time, how much is that showing up in my consciousness and relating to you? And so, for ourselves and for the example, for our endeavors to truly authentically represent our parampara, our disciplic succession, and such that our relationships with each other, again, whether it's within a particular ashram or in family or when we go to the post office, our relationships, to what extent are we creating and co-creating that truly sweet atmosphere, that truly attractive, sweet atmosphere through our relationships. Also, how we share the philosophy and in our relationships. I'm reminded, it's about almost 30 years now since I'm presenting, different like communication-based, transformational oriented workshops in devotee communities, really till about 2004. Practically anyone who came to our programs identified with the devotional communities, different devotional communities. Starting about 20 years ago, more and more started coming who many didn't and still don't. They don't know who is Srila Prabhupada, what is the Maha Mantra, when they first come to Satvatove. And many I'm very glad to say many come to Srila Prabhupada's teachings and movement, and their first connection is the Satvatove experience. So going back, we would present workshops, sometimes just like short 2-3 hour workshops, and we talk about, like Srila Rupa Goswami, he emphasizes about ways of being that are conducive for meaningful relationships amongst those who are sincere about self-realization. That's pretty lakshanam, relationships that are truly dear. And not just like for communication skills, or not even just to have nice relations, but a true communication-based, relation-based approach to self-realization, to super soul connection, to support ourselves, to support the self, to turn towards itself in self-awareness, and to turn towards the supreme person in an attitude of devotion. So I mentioned Srila Rupa Goswami in, with the groups who they're familiar with nectar of instruction, and we'd emphasize about creating environments in our relationships where it's a safe place to share the heart confidentially, to inquire confidentially. And sometimes I'd get comments, comical, humorous, and there's truth in humor, and they go, Dhira Govinda, this community is the last place in the world I'd want to share my heart and mind confidentially. And then there would be like this kind of nervous laughter. Oh yeah. Like, so it's sad, it's sad. And at the same time, such experiences, and it's not about pointing the finger. I get to take a look at, how am I responsible for creating society relationships based on fear and repression? Where can I refine my consciousness to support the cultivation of a community truly based on, this is a safe, sacred space to reveal the heart confidentially, based on inspiration, purpose, not driven by fear and repression. And at the same time, like those experiences gave me more and more, provided me with increasing inspiration and enthusiasm to develop these programs, workshops, writings, seminars, all based on Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and to bring these experiences to the devotional communities and the world at large.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really resonate with your idea of serving the relationship that you mentioned, because ultimately that's what love is. We are loving love ultimately. The goal of life, as sometimes Prabhupada himself will say, goal of life is not Krishna, but it's love of Krishna. So the goal of life is the relationship, because somehow love is a relationship, implies a relationship. So and yes, however we are, it's very, how to say, there's no escape from the way we conceive that, because in this Bhagavatam it is say, if you are loving God, that has to be reflected in how you relate to everyone else and everything else. Recently, I read a few months ago already, a Christian contemporary mystic, and she will say, quite extremely but nicely, she will say, I only love God as much as I love the person I love the least. Right? No, like my love for God has to be reflected in the person I hate the most, so to say. Not I hate, of course, that I love the least, because it should extend to everyone. So if I hate you, somehow or other, that message is being sent to God as well. No, I cannot say, God, I love you, but I hate all of you here. That's not coherent, so to say. So I appreciate that point of serving not only God, but serving the relationship, and not only the relationship between Radha and Krishna, so to say, but every relationship, because ultimately everything is in relationship with the divine, who is the center. So we have to begin at home. And regarding what you mentioned about, and I acknowledge you're doing very nicely with the Satvatove experience, creating a safe space for people to be vulnerable, basically, and through that to be empowered, because vulnerability properly expressed in a safe vessel brings about empowerment, and I can give testimony of that in our experience there. And that makes me think of another term and a new project, so to say, that came in my life recently, which is tadatmya, which tadatmya is this Sanskrit word that we can translate as basically empathy, and the capacity. And I remember you in your seminar say something kind of higher empathy equals better diagnosis or something like that. So the more we are able to not only to enter into the other person's world, but of course for that to happen, to open ourselves, to be present, to really listen to the other person without labeling, without judging, to be allowing others to be heard and accepted unconditionally. I will say that's what creates this tadadmi or empathy. And I really experienced that also when we had the seminar. There were a few exercises where we were invited to be heard, no, to be received, and to hear and receive others, trying to put away all filters of labeling and boxing people or judging, and trying to just be purely in the present moment and hear and listen. And that somehow also made me think about this topic that we've talked about in Alacha on Krishna's unconditional love, and how God already is accepting us fully, already is loving everyone unconditionally, and now it's up to us to reciprocate somehow accordingly. But somehow it's important that we have a glimpse of God's unconditional love and acceptance in our relationships with other people, and how we, in our case as Vaishnavas, should create those experiences for the members of our community, for the people we relate to give them moments of them being unconditionally accepted, of them being absolutely heard, without, again, labeling, judging. And I'm thinking how much we can become disempowered as communities by forgetting to do so, by neglecting this daily miracle that we can just sit in front of one another and just look at each other with compassion and acceptance and non-judgmental mood. And I really invoke an epiphany, even in a few moments, even if you don't know the person at all. I remember it happened in the seminar. So what do you think about that? How crucial all these principles of empathy and acceptance, how necessary you find them in our current community, so to say?
Thank you. Hare Krishna. On the first part of what you shared, I was reminded, I won't get it exactly, but there's a quote by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. May my only wish be for the greatest benediction for those, for my worst enemy. Of course, pure devotee doesn't have enemies, but others might see them as enemies. So reminded of that, like that's real love, a full Jesus-like spirit, that even those who consider me a terrible enemy, I aspire to wish for their greatest good, their greatest good. Because we don't want to imitate that with like a false humility. At the same time, it's a wonderful ideal to aspire for.
Yeah. It reminds me also of Haridas Thakur when he was about to be killed, and they will whip him and he wouldn't die, and the ones who want to kill him say, if you don't die, they may kill us. So he said, I don't want you to die, so if for you to not suffer, I will die, so to say. No, of course, then comes the resurrection of Haridas Thakur, very Jesus-like section of Chaitanya Charitamrita, but shows that willingness, like extreme, as compassionate, as you mentioned. An important point is also to see where we are standing in that, and not necessarily force ourselves to imitate, but somehow be inspired with that example and do something accordingly. So regarding this acceptance, Dhira Govinda Prabhu, this like being present, this listening that I know I briefly mentioned, I remember after our Satvatove seminar that I've studied, like, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, a little bit on nonviolent communication, which is a very interesting 4-step system. And it basically begins with observing without judging what's going on, but limiting, quote unquote, limiting ourselves to just observe, which is a lot, although it may sound like too little, and it's quite difficult. And this observe is for me kind of synonymous with listening. And I remember you shared a very beautiful quote in our seminar from Paul Tillich. He will say, like, the first duty of love is to listen. I never heard that one. I almost go to the floor when I listen to it. It sounded so impactful and so simple, but so true. And I immediately couldn't avoid thinking, okay, in our tradition of love, of bhakti, sometimes we start with Shravan. Shravan, Kirtan, Vishnu, Smana. So Shravan somehow is
Shravanam.
listen. And listening is not only I will sit for listening the class, but also you have to be open to listen to the other person unconditionally, no, without judgment, which is another nuance and layer of this anga, of this limb of Shravan. So yeah, I don't know if any thoughts come to you in connection to this idea of listening being the first duty of love, how we begin expressing our love by listening, or by being willing to learn to listen in most cases.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that quote from Paul Tillich, the first duty of love is to listen. And I'm impacted hearing how you were impacted when we at the seminar, probably right in the first hours, we mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's conformational for me. So eloquent, as Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami says, essential truth spoken concisely is true eloquence. So that's eloquence from Paul Tillich. And yeah, for me it relates to that guyamakiti prichati, to create it's not just like not meant to be just a cliche, create a safe space. Like that. It means a space where whatever I'm experiencing, whatever the hurt, the pain, the embarrassment, the foolishness, the guilt, the arrogance, whatever experience, like I'm going to be received, understood. It doesn't mean I'll be agreed with necessarily, but there are different conversations, agreement, disagreement, and understanding. And so, so this is a basic principle. I know Carl Rogers in his writings writes a lot about this, and this is a fully Vaishnava principle that, when one is truly received in a roadblock-free space, to make it, when a spirit soul having a human experience is received without, and a roadblock can look like, I'll prematurely give you advice to try to solve your problems, or I'll praise you, maybe because I want you to like me, or whatever.
Yeah, or, you mentioned this roadblocks for.
Yeah. And so, so the first duty of love is to listen. And so when I'm truly received, then growth naturally happens. Okay, so growth, that can be like a personal growth term. And what, in Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, growth means the self turning towards the super self. It means we're clear, we're supporting ourselves and others. I would say this is, in this realm, this is true love. This is true friendship, to truly support each other in self-realization, super consciousness, super soul realization. And so in that space of full acceptance, willing to suspend our judgments, which is different than pretending I don't have judgments. Of course I have judgments. Everyone has judgments. And that's a sign of intelligence, to judge, make differentiation. Willing to suspend my judgments, to fully be with you, that you're received with unconditional positive regard, then the growth of the soul naturally happens. And that growth can look like realizing that maybe what I thought was a pretty flower is actually a weed in my heart. Growth of the soul, connecting with that natural enthusiasm to give myself to higher purpose, to bhakti yoga. And so that love, that acceptance, that's vital. It's not optional. It's vital in relationships where we're truly endeavoring to support and caringly challenge each other towards spiritual growth and purification of heart.
I've witnessed myself during the seminar, but I'm sure there has been so many other testimonies and cases of people taking part of the seminar and going through really transformational moments. So I was just thinking, if you can recall some, I don't know if we are able to share that without giving any names, of course, but any particular experience of someone in particular that somehow comes to your memory, that there was some type of strong epiphany on something they said in terms of what they experienced by feeling fully accepted and fully heard and fully loved, so to say, despite whatever may be there, no? Despite messiness, despite embarrassing stuff. I don't know if any testimony comes to your mind that you may like to share. If this doesn't break the agreements of the Satvatove Foundation, I don't want to transgress that. Just in case.
It does not break agreement. It's just one of those things where I'm a little challenged to think of one example because there's literally thousands of examples.
Yeah. Sorry to put you in that uncomplicated situation.
Okay. I'm remembering one. This was in a foundational seminar.
Mm-hmm.
It's recent. And again, like practically every few minutes, there's abundance of examples in every seminar. We've conducted about 150 foundational seminars and 80 advanced seminars and Satvatove 3. But okay, this one. Okay. So so someone was with his partner in a process, and he felt trusting, and he expressed about deep woundedness from the earliest age in relation with his mother. And he was going to places like you're not allowed to go. Like he hated his mother, like he didn't have love, and this is a deep resentment, and I won't get into the details. He experienced just a lot of pain and abandonment and like that. And it was really, the process was just a few minutes, and then he came out of it and he shared with his partner and the group. He shared that not in an artificial way, not in a way to look spiritual, but he really, because in being received, he expressed for the first time in his life, and again, just in a few minutes, he expressed so much gunk and toxic stuff that he was holding towards his mother, which is like, you're supposed to love your mother and appreciate her and have forgiveness. He expressed all that, and then he shared. He came to true empathy and compassion for his mother, an understanding of her pain, and understanding of what she was going through and her challenges. And that just, there wasn't any sophisticated process. At the same time, just by his partner, who was not like tremendously experienced in these things, just his partner was quietly, simply in that roadblock-free space. And then he released so much burden that he was carrying for many years, even decades. So that's one example that comes to mind.
Thank you for sharing it. Yeah, what you mentioned regarding this particular example brings me to mind many examples in terms of as this person was able to somehow connect with his first, do catharsis and express all that he felt as he needed it, and eventually he was able to feel some connection and empathy towards his mother, and also appreciate, okay, she also had some pain, she also somehow, if you want to use the word victim, she received something herself from someone else, probably from her own mother. Sometimes the parampara, quote unquote, happens in that way. How heal? Sorry, what?
I appreciate that, the parampara.
Quote unquote, but a form of passing on something, right?
Yeah.
And many times I've talked with devotees that somehow are working on some personal stuff related to experience they had, mostly as usually with their parents in childhood. But one of the most healing and empowering things for them is to be able to see beyond their own trauma and suffering, and to connect with their parents' own trauma and suffering, who they may have received from their own parents and from some life circumstance, and so on and so forth. And of course, at the end of the day, there makes no sense to continue thinking, so who is to blame here? No, so should we blame our grandfather? Probably it's his father. Probably if we go back to the root, Krishna is to blame. So at the end of the day, we may realize this blame game doesn't help. So better enter into empathy and understand that even if my parents, to give an example, may have created some situation that made me suffer, probably they were trying to give me an improved version that one day they received when they were children. And my commitment now as a father or as whatever is to continue improving that version and refining and distilling and giving something more and more like healed and whole and so on, right?
Yeah, and that relates to, as we know, like there's 5 primary subjects of Bhagavad Gita. 4 are eternal, 1 is temporary. The one that's temporary is karma. And as the saying goes, hurt people hurt people. So that's your parampara analogy, beautiful analogy. Hurt people. And so, okay, in this particular instance that I shared, and hundreds and thousands of other instances. So in that moment, that gentleman, he changed his karma. And I don't say that lightly. I don't mean to be like philosophical. He changed his karma, and he changed what almost surely was like his karma for a few decades and probably generations of karma. And he came to realization, because I had some contact with him afterward. He came to realize that woundedness from mom and dad, which almost every human being I'm familiar with carries at least some, and sometimes hugely severe woundedness from the legacy from mother and father, and he was passing it on. He was hurting others less than consciously. And then with that realization, he changed his karma, and he changed his destiny, and he changed the quality of what he's giving to people and the world. And I'm reminded in that right there in the introduction of Bhagavad Gita, where Srila Prabhupada describes about the 5 prime subjects, and karma is temporary. And Prabhupada talks about transcending our karma, changing our karma. He makes it clear we can destroy our karma. We can destroy our karma forever. And in the process that Prabhupada describes there, he doesn't talk about prema bhakti. He doesn't talk about bhava. He talks about sattva. He talks simply about cultivating knowledge, raising awareness, the essence of sattva, to bring to conscious awareness. So just by raising awareness, we're no longer slaves, yantra rudani mayaya, on the machine of karma. And so, so that's, we're talking about examples of that. Now, of course, not to be like sentimental or overly idealistic, I might truly transcend my karma. Or I gave one example, he or she, they might truly transcend, and it's true. It's philosophically true, and it's liberation. It's freedom. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we're eternally transcendental and free, because I might truly change, rise above, transcend particular karmic patterns around my relationship with anger, my relationship with communication, my relationship with eating, my relationship with thought process. We might truly transcend. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean we're in that infallible category. And the reality is, to the extent that I become less than conscious with my habits, then and I allow myself to associate with lower modes, then I may quickly reconnect with the part of the machine of maybe the parental legacy or previous life legacy or the bullying school legacy, or what I might reconnect with that machine. So that and because my experience, and I appreciate hearing your experience, from the Satvatove Foundational Seminar, my experience, whether through coaching or the seminars, the workshops, is that people profoundly destroy their karma. They rise above it. And then it's often a challenge that, like, a week later, a month later, a year later, have we taken that consciousness we created in that embryonic environment? Have we expanded it, or have we allowed it to become faded?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just this is an important part of the conversation too.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking when you were speaking about, of course, sattva's as awareness, and not only, of course, as having a moment of awareness, but then working diligently to keep the awareness,
Mm.
is to foster sattva. So for me came this idea of sattva as the discipline of daily vigilance, trying to be concise for the pleasure of Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami. Not like sattva implies a daily vigilance, like awareness, but it's a discipline, of course, to keep a daily observance, daily vigilance, to remain aware of what we remain to be aware, and to keep things in the light, so to say, not in the dark. So yeah, I totally appreciate that, the importance of, the power of awareness, of becoming aware of something we were not aware, but then, of course, the responsibility and commitment of keeping the awareness, keeping the focus, it's a discipline in itself. It's part of one sadhana, one could say.
Yeah, actually, as you were speaking, I was saying, hey, that's sadhana. So you shared. I feel resonant, and that, of course, we're talking about conscious practice of sadhana bhakti, not mechanical.
Yeah.
And then that's why I mentioned, like, till about 2004, those who came to the programs, transformative communication, Satvatove, pretty much close to 100% identified as practitioners of bhakti, or identified with that culture. And then what started happening is more and more came to the programs who didn't know what bhakti is, or like that. And then they would do, like, in the seminars, they got so much profound transformation realization about, like, pulling the weed. We use that analogy a lot from Rupa Goswami, pulling the weeds from the garden of the heart, and clearing the toxic stuff, and the self-deception, and the greed, and the envy, and truly clearing it, not pretending it's not there, and truly clearing it. And then, so, because we give that analogy, like, there's the garden. In the garden, we need to pull the weeds, otherwise the water and the sunlight will nourish the weeds, and they'll strangle the flowers. And then so many more, as years go on, they come to us, go, okay, well, I'm pulling the weeds, so what's the watering process? And then naturally we would introduce the regulative principles, and the sadhana, and then we develop more and more programs, just like here, like at my home. We starting about 14 years ago, where I'm hosting several programs per week when I'm in town. That's direct bhakti programs, and and for me it relates to let's say that relationship and distinction between states of consciousness and stages of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And of the two, the stages of consciousness, that's more important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, there's different formulations, but the 9-stage process at Awo Shara Tata Sadhu Sangato Bhajana Kriya Tatornata Nivritti, that's like 9 stages. And because whether it's in a seminar room, or some people might ingest some substance and have an epiphany state of consciousness, like that could happen, epiphany state of consciousness. And then often it can be like epiphany and then crash. And then so this conscious sattvic principle, sattvic communication, sattvic sadhana, then that's a program. That's a program that each day, each month, each year of my life, I'm actually progressing towards pure and pure, higher and higher stages of consciousness. And then those epiphany states, well, that's great. And then my understanding, they're ideally intended to move and inspire us to deeper enthusiasm to do the heavy day to day
Mm-hmm.
sadhana, to enhance our to rise in the stages of consciousness. Otherwise, someone might truly have an epiphany state of consciousness, but then someone can get addicted to the thrill,
the dopamine peak of bhakti.
Yeah. And then that becomes like trying to kind of like Prabhupada used the term like taking spiritual life cheaply and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, because I think to have those things clearly present make the whole devotional journey sustainable and realistic. Because if not, we may just look, as you say, for some permanent sense of thrill and dopamine peak, or over idealize how should we be feeling on a daily basis, instead of embracing commitment, embracing sober effort and this daily vigilance in sadhana, which is what makes the whole thing sattvic and sustainable, so to say. So going back 1 second to the parampara version that I gave you a few minutes ago, the perverted parampara version I spoke about, because that also even can happen, unfortunately, in some cases, in the name of parampara, in the name of the real parampara. Sometimes, as a father can give unresolved issues to the son, sometimes some without bad intention in many cases, but sometimes people who may be serving in the positions of gurus may have some unresolved issues, let's say, and sometimes they are passing that onto their followers in the name of parampara, in the name of divine revelation, in the sense that the followers may be also over idealizing their guru and receiving an unresolved trauma as if it were completely spiritual epiphany, without realizing I'm receiving some unresolved stuff that then I will replicate myself, and so on and so forth. So that, of course, takes to so many scenarios of abuse. And also, as we read in your bio, you, if I may, as a community healer, you have been quite committed to child protection, which is one aspect of this dysfunctional phase of abuse or perverted parampara, sometimes even. And in my book on radical personalism, I've touched upon that. But also, I think it's totally crucial to pay attention to child abuse, since even from recent situations, we see still things like that are going on. But also the importance of being able to extend the notion of abuse to so many ways that it may happen, that if we don't know that there are abuse, if we don't acknowledge them as such, we may just normalize certain forms of abuse. And personally, I think not all of them, of course, but a good amount of them sometimes happening in guru disciple dynamics, with hierarchical codependency, as I like to put it, or like celebrity consciousness or over idealization, and thus dehumanizing of whomever we are over idealizing, whether a disciple toward the guru or sometimes the guru toward the disciple. And I remember you in your seminar you mentioned something specifically in connection to someone in a position of leadership. I took it like that. Did you say we need honest feedback to keep our sanity? And so I appreciated that one, especially among so much non-honest feedback. And sometimes one may be in a position where there's not bad intention, but there's lots of praise, superficial praise and superficial criticism. So both of them are non-honest feedback, in my opinion. So one needs lots of honest feedback, especially if you're in a position of leader, to remain sane, as you mentioned, to remain sober, to not go crazy, and to not end up in scenarios of abuse or perpetrating, again, a perverted sense of parampara. So I don't know. I like to hear some thoughts of you in this realm that you have been quite engaged, more related to child protection, but I'm sure also in touch with so many other forms of abuse in your work with Satvatove and so on.
Okay, Hare Krishna, yeah, okay, yes. It touches on many interrelated principles and areas. Yes, yeah, so, yeah, well, we talked about the garden analogy and the weeds, and so as to the extent that we're influenced by the modes, especially the lower modes, then we have shadow areas, and there's things in ourself we don't see. I gave the metaphor earlier because, like, oh yeah, of course these are pretty flowers, but others could see no, they're actually toxic weeds, Dhira Govinda. So it's important, not that any feedback we receive, whether it's admiration or constructive, not that or we automatically accept or reject it. Blind acceptance is no virtue, and blind rejection is no virtue. At the same time, we're responsible to process it honestly, hopefully, and so we can see, like, community and communication have the same roots. So in genuine community, there's genuine communication. When there's tensions and disagreements, which there will be even in effective communities, so that to surround ourselves with society where people care enough about us to be honest, and also often true love, true caring means, like, I'm willing, I have the courage, I'm willing to care enough about you to not care whether you like me.
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote from Oscar Wilde, that real friends stab you from your front, not from your back.
I appreciate that. Now, of course, not that we want to try to be rajasic and do damage to provoke. At the same time, in the name of care, I'm not going to withhold the truth. And as per Bhagavad Gita, anudvegam kram bhakyam sacham priyahinam chayat. Krishna says the austerity of speech, meaning sattvic speech, means I care enough about our relationship to share truthfully, honestly, and I'm endeavoring 100% to do it in a way where I'm being caring and you get my caring, but not that in the name of caring, I'll just wear blinders or something. And then, so in that way, we're really surrounding ourselves with people who help us in our awareness, and so that we don't build up these illusions and buying into my own publicity and only surrounding myself with people who praise, because then it becomes like, then I feel my need to feel powerful, and then your need maybe to have someone to do your thinking for you, and it becomes this kind of lower mode dynamic, power and needing to avoid responsibility. And, as far as well, I served with the state of Florida for like 11 years in positions like children and family counselor, for Department of Foster Care, social work services program manager, medical social worker in children's units of hospitals. And then even going back to the early 80s, I was involved in family counseling and things like that. But so, and then in 1998, actually, I was asked by the ISKCON GBC to establish the ISKCON International Central Office of Child Protection, and I agreed. And I served as director for more than 6 years, into 2004. Yeah, and then so of course this child maltreatment, it's a planetary problem, and like everywhere there's problems. And then at the same time, I would see in the devotional bhakti communities, there's sometimes like extra layers to the problem. I mean, this is a topic I could talk a lot about, but I'll just kind of get some. Well, so one thing, of course, we can look at those who have like malicious intent to harm children, and okay, now that's there. And at the same time, what I was finding, like, well, okay, my I was encouraging parents to be responsible, because what I would see, unfortunately, like you mentioned, the guru thing,
Mm.
I'll go on a brief tangent. Like I've personally been inspired by your story about, those who you accepted as like spiritual guides and leaders, and you experienced some tough times, and I've personally been, I just want to share that with you, and I've been personally inspired by your story and how you've managed that and created auspicious realizations and transformation. And so I would, like a lot of parents, just like, oh yeah, my guru said to send my child here, and my guru said, and you can see my nonverbals. I'm cynical, maybe even over the edge to I'm skeptical over to the edge to and I would never say to parents, don't send your child there. Like that wasn't my role. Oh, you don't know what's happening there. I wouldn't say that. I would encourage parents, be responsible for the protection and the education of your children. Now, if being responsible looks like I'm going to send my child, but parents, they wouldn't even check who's the teachers, what's the history of that school. My guru said, like that, and then countless times, terrible things would happen to the child, and then it becomes this just horrible, tragic situation, leading to we like that. So that this kind of blind faith, blind acceptance, which is not encouraged in Bhagavad Gita. It's not our tradition. Our tradition is conscious. Prabhupada wanted all his followers to be independently thoughtful. Okay, and then especially when like children are involved, and I would see parents, and sometimes the psychology, and I don't mean to paint with too broad a brush. There was like so many parents are irresponsible and conscious in their education and upbringing, obviously, but too often I would see, because in the name of spiritual, that means I'm advanced, and then but I would see, when I get into conversation, sometimes counseling, kind of behind it isn't so much like I have so much love and trust for my guru. Behind it is kind of like this tamasic desire to avoid responsibility for adult life.
Thank you for saying it so boldly, even with nonverbal language. That's an important point. Huh? How much this is one of the topics that also I'm passionate about, and I'm writing my radical personalism book. I even at one point thought about making a separate book, not yet, but who knows, on spiritual bypassing, on the ideal of, again, it's painted that I love my guru and I'm very chaste and loyal, but as you mentioned many times, not always, but there is so much of avoidance of personal responsibility, especially in the face of, okay, you have to become an adult. Now you have to develop critical thinking, your own criteria. Yeah? As you quoted Prabhupada, you have to become an independently thoughtful people. You have to be independent in the context of being independent of Krishna. You have to develop some sense of independence as well. So yeah, I see that's. I remember also I took one note when we were in the seminar. This I wrote myself on something you were talking. You were talking, emphasizing a lot responsibility, which is a word that I like a lot, and I don't think it's very popular. People doesn't like to be told about responsibility, which I like also to divide the word like responsibility, to have the ability to respond to a certain given scenario, like as you mentioned, the father with the kids, you have to respond to that situation by taking responsibility. And I remember I wrote, radical personalism is equal with radical personal responsibility. Somehow you were saying something, I don't remember what, on responsibility, and this came from me like, for me, when I talk about radical personalism, ultimately to be a personalist is to take responsibility for my own self, to somehow justify my own existence by being responsible, basically. And And also being responsible comes to my mind, has to do with how to say, trying to be, try to establish my adhikar, I will say, but adhikar in terms of like recognize what I can do, what I cannot do, and what I should be doing according what I can do to what I can do. Because sometimes we have the capacity for doing some things, but we are not acting upon that. We are not playing out our capacities. Like this example, a father has a child, and a father has not only the duty, but the capacity of investigating to which school I'm sending him and so on. So if you have the adhikar, so to say, the capacity to do that, but you are not doing that, basically that means you are not taking responsibility, or you are not fully embracing your adhikar, like your present eligibility to do all the things that you could do, and therefore probably you should do. and neglecting our adhikar, of course, can be a source of big problems, not only for us but for others, especially if we have people that somehow or other are depending on us, whether we are gurus or we are father or mother or some other position of influence or leadership. So this idea came to me in connection to responsibility and adhikar, and Krishna in the Gita so many times emphasizes you have to act upon your adhikar, and that has so many meanings. Not only, okay, I have this acquired nature, this vocation, I will express myself accordingly. That's, of course, also part of that, but also like what Krishna will say to Arjuna, better you do your own thing bad than someone else's duty nicely. So try to again be vigilant and acknowledge what's in your area of engagement, what's expected from you according to your potential and capacity, and act accordingly. One line from the Bhagavatam comes to mind, which says Svedikari Janishta Saguna Parikirtita. Like to acknowledge, Bhaktivinoda Thakur translates that line as to acknowledge your adhikar is true beauty. To acknowledge who you are, where you are at this moment in your journey, in your life, of your progress. And of course, to acknowledge it is just not verbally, but just to act upon that. That's real virtue. That's real beauty. And of course, then he says, "Do not do that" is the opposite of that, right?
It's irresponsible.
Yeah.
Krishna's statement cautioning Arjuna and us to not be a pretender, to responsibly acknowledge our adhikar and act on it, and to not do that because it's more spiritual to go to the forest or whatever. That's irresponsible. I'm reminded in this conversation of a statement from M. Scott Peck. He wrote, the path to sainthood goes through adulthood. And so
beautiful. I remember I mentioned in my book that to not be irresponsibility doesn't mean not only means to do what you are not supposed to do, but also to not do what you are supposed to do. That's also to be responsible. And sometimes we may be very careful about avoiding the sins of commission, so to say, but we may fall into the sins of omission. But omitting to do what we are supposed to be doing.
There's irresponsible acts of commission and irresponsible acts of omission.
Exactly. And both are equally important, so to say, to have into the picture. So going back for a minute before maybe we are wrapping up, but you mentioned Carl Rogers a few minutes ago, and it was funny because I wanted to share with you today. Sometimes I share with some of my guests a quote that I have been recently reading or something, and ask for their thoughts. And today I wanted to share with you, I was planning to share with you a quote from Carl Rogers, actually. So it was nice that you mentioned him a few minutes ago. It's a little bit more connected with the point that we were talking before about listening, and why for many of us it's difficult to listen, but somehow it's connected to what we are talking now, because sometimes I've seen, and I'm not free from that, but people in certain position of leadership or influence, when they are invited to take responsibility, where they're invited to I don't know, hold themselves accountable for whatever thing may have happened. Many of them are not willing to listen. Them are not willing to expose themselves to what the other person has to say. So this is a quote from Carl Rogers in that connection. I'll share it and I'll ask for you for any thoughts you may have on that. So he says like this: the great majority of us cannot listen. We find ourselves compelled to evaluate because listening is too dangerous. The first requirement is courage, and we do not always have it. If you really understand a person through attentive hearing, if you are willing to enter his private world and see the way life appears to him, you run the risk of being changed yourself. This risk of being changed is one of the most frightening prospects most of us can face. So, Carl Rogers, Kijai. So,
Yeah,
I don't know if you have any thoughts on this connection. I think it's very powerful,
it's
very, very
it's
powerful words.
it's definitely very powerful. I'm not able to improve on the way Carl Rogers expressed it, so I'll just kind of reiterate and invent it and emphasize. Yeah, because we think listening, the first duty of love is to listen. Guyamakiti Prichati, creating sacred space, and for the most part, for the conditioned soul, it's not easy. And I'm just expanding on my understanding of what Carl Rogers is saying there. He says it so eloquently and elegantly. Yeah. So, okay. So to cross the bridge from my world to your world, and to show understanding of what you're saying and the feeling behind it and your worldview. And again, understanding doesn't mean agreement. Like I might understand someone feels humiliated because she made a joke at your expense in front of the whole group. Now, I might not agree. I might think like, no, she really meant it in an affectionate way. At the same time, deeply receiving someone means we're willing to suspend my opinion, my point of view. As the saying goes, people don't care what you know till they know that you care. So if someone really feels cared about because you suspended your judgment, your agreement, your praise, your criticism, you suspended all that to really show understanding, then I'm more likely to be open to hear your point of view. People don't care what you know till they know that you care. And so just as Carl Rogers said there, so it's risky to truly cross the bridge from my world to your world, to hear your perspective. Now, risky can sound, he used the word dangerous, which can be seen as a negative term, but it's true. It has impact. It's like, if I'm truly hearing and absorbing your point of view from a non-judgmental space, then it might be shown that what I was thinking I was understanding about something is only partially correct, or it's completely wrong, or I'm opening up to the foundations of what I thought I was secure in being completely changed and pulled out from under me. So risky or dangerous. Okay, a more positive way to put it could be like, if I'm truly ready to cross the bridge from my world into your world and endeavor to understand, because empathy means to understand and to communicate my understanding. I'm truly willing to do that and create a roadblock-free space. More positively, I'm opening myself to the opportunity for growth and expansion, and to come out of perhaps some stagnant comfort zone of my perspectives or my emotional calcification. And so on the positive say, I'm opening myself up to the opportunity for growth and expansion and transformation and development. And to the extent that I'm attached not to truth, but if I'm extent to being right about something, I'm extent to a hunker, to the extent that I'm attached to being right, and my false ego conceptions and my judgments about you, to the extent that I'm attached to that being right, then it's terrifying to truly hear you openly. And to the extent that I'm true, what I'm attached to is truth, and growth, truly spiritual things and consciousness, okay, then it's a real adventure. And then maybe hearing you deeply and you hearing me deeply, maybe it turns out on a particular topic or issue, oh, maybe you were 80% correct, or I was, or I was right about this, and your perceptions weren't, so I could, and that's like, whatever, we're just both attached to deepening our understanding of truth and me and you and Siddhanta. And again, to the extent that I'm attached to ego and being right and looking good and just maintaining a miserable calcified status quo, then it's terrifying to deeply listen.
Yeah. That reminds me this Sanskrit term for the three types of conversation, Bada, Jalpa, and Vitanda, and how so Jalpa and Vitanda. In Vitanda, I'm not even allowing you to talk. I'm just jumping at you and wanting to defeat you and be correct always. And Jalpa may be diplomatic enough as to allow you to say something, but I'm just waiting for my turn and internally still attached to being right. But Bada has all to do with being attached to the truth, as you mentioned. I don't want to defeat you. You don't want to defeat me. We want to be, so to say, defeated by the truth. And that's our real victory, our kijai, our vijay. So yeah, I was just thinking about this word when you were describing the actual spirit of conversation and dialogue, like really being attached to whatever proves to be the truth. I'm willing to give myself into that direction, as risky, as dangerous as it may seem. It seems dangerous, but it is not. So if I perceive embracing the truth as risky, I shouldn't, like Krishna at the end of the Gita saying, asking Arjuna, surrender to me and do not fear. Like he knows that most of us will fear, will be trembling. So he says that even in the beginning of the Gita, even at the end of the Gita, the other day talking with Richard Rohr, he told me, in the Bible, there's 365 times the Bible says, do not fear. Now, one per each day of the year, because they know how much we fear, how much like danger and risk we still perceive from our false egoic perspective, and how much we need to be invited to embrace truth. And as Srila Siddhar Maharaj once said very beautifully, he says, in the beginning, from our still relative perspective, when we hear this divine call to give ourselves and so on, to open, be vulnerable, we may feel too much risk, very little gain. Then but he says, then we progress and we will understand, we reach another understanding. We will conclude, the more I risk, the more I gain. And eventually, when we become fully realized, we will conclude, there was no risk, it was all gain. But of course, at least in theory, we have to understand how the things will play out across the journey, so to say.
Wow, I appreciate that. Yeah, of course, to give up my false ego and fully enter your world, there's no risk. At the same time, at my level of lack of realization, there's lots of risk. And what you shared from Sridhar Maharaj, I mean, there's a lecture, a conversation with Prabhupada, and he's saying, like, speaking to people new, and he said, take a gamble, right? Like everything in life is a gamble. Take a gamble. Chant Hare Krishna. There's no tax. Now, Prabhupada, he would clarify, of course, there is no gamble. It's a sure thing. But he said, like, no, from your point of view, it's a gamble. Should I go to the cinema? Should I should I take LSD? And like everything he said. So yeah, from your point of view, it's a gamble to spend time coming to associate with the bhakti yogis and like that. So I'm encouraging you, take a gamble and see what you experience.
So we are not against all forms of gambling, so to say. Just clarifying in proper context, of course.
Yes, in proper context, yeah.
Okay, Dhira Govinda Prabhu, I think we are reaching the end of our conversation. I think we got a very nice time to unfold certain topics. But before concluding, I always would like to ask you, and whomever comes, if there's, I don't know, anything else you may like to share, any particular theme, topic, final reflection you may like to conclude our conversation with, whatever comes to your heart, if anything, would like to be shared.
Well, I feel successful in our 90 minutes. We started by establishing an intention for consciousness raising, awareness raising. And I know for myself, I'm feeling enlivened in broadened, expanded consciousness. And I just, in kind of some of your final statements there, just in the past few minutes, and you brought in, Bhagavad Gita and towards the 18th chapter. So I'm thinking of, I think one of the first things I shared was the first chapter in Arjuna's expression to Krishna and Nimai the carpenter and like that. Something also to right towards that very closure of Bhagavad Gita, the very closure of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna has spoken the whole Bhagavad Gita, and then he says, Vimisheta dasheshena yate chasi tataku. It's like if anyone could effectively force or pressure or coerce, it would be Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he doesn't. He says, Arjuna, consider carefully what I have said, deliberate carefully on what I have said, and then do as you wish to do. So Krishna, so one thing, he's completely 100% honoring Arjuna. Of course, Arjuna is a real historical personality, and he represents us. He's honoring Arjuna's free will, self-determination, personal free choice. And Krishna's not saying, I don't care. Krishna's caring deeply, personally, and he's fully honoring Arjuna's self-determination and free will. And so for me, that kind of gets to the essence of, the essence of sattva is to bring to conscious awareness that which till now has not been perceived. A way to say that, the essence, to the extent that we're sattvic in our communication, relationships, consciousness, we have an expanded range of choice. And so, so much in the name of bhakti or Krishna consciousness, we've been guilty of like overt or subtle force or coercion, whether in relationships and Srila Prabhupada, of course, following in the line of Krishna, just so much emphasizes this Krishna consciousness. Yes, this love of Krishna, the Krishna consciousness, devotional service, it's voluntary, it's based on love, it's based on inspiration. And so that's what comes to me related to what we discussed earlier, related to principles that Carl Rogers also often writes and talks about. When the self is fully received, that means there's no sense of force or coercion or manipulation or like that, then that growth towards self-love and love of Krishna naturally expands. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Dhira Govinda Prabhu. And you mentioned this beautiful verse from the Gita now that includes the word asheshana, which basically means endlessly, where Krishna is inviting Arjuna to endlessly ruminate on what has been talked about. So by you quoting this verse, somehow I felt, Dhira Govinda Prabhu is also inviting me to endlessly contemplate the topics we have talked today, and because that's the nature of this conversation. It's not that now the conversation is over, although we will conclude now the podcast. This is an ongoing dialogue up to eternity, and in eternity it continues unfolding forever. So I really appreciate this last verse, this concluding note you mentioned with this specific word asheshana, which invites not only me but all of us to continue contemplating, ruminating, and thinking and reflecting about all these topics and see how we can apply them in practice in a deeper and deeper way. So thank you so much for that. And for those who have connected a little bit later, after the beginning, I will share again the contact of Dhira Govinda Prabhu for those who would like to connect with him and to know more about the Satvatove seminars. I'm sure there will be some foundational seminars that will be done in the 2024 both, yes, in the US and in Europe eventually, and other places in the world. So in the website you will find that. So Dhira Govinda Prabhu's email is David B. Wolf at Sattva, with only one T, Satvatove, TOBE.com. And of course, the website of the foundation is Satvatove.com. So thank you so much again, Dhira Govinda Prabhu. Thank you so much to all of you for watching. And we'll be seeing each other again in 2 weeks as we are sharing this Free Radical podcast in a fortnightly way now. So thank you so much again, Dhira Govinda Prabhu. My pleasure.
Thank you, Padmanabha Swami. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.